Welcome to Duels of the Mind. Donald Woods and I have been looking at the 12 best games of chess ever played, and this week we feature two of the true giants of the game at contrasting stages of their careers. Donald will be helping me with the actual moves in a moment, but first the players themselves. Earlier in the series we saw the Cuban Jose Capablanca and his impact on the game. Now we follow him to Rotterdam in 1938, still a legendary figure, almost impossible to defeat, who represented the very best in chess of the previous 3 decades. In Rotterdam he faced Mikhail Botvinnik, the up-and-coming representative of the Soviet school. The game therefore took on the symbolic overtone of a battle of generations. For Botvinnik, his natural rise was to be blocked by the Second World War. For Capablanca, maybe a last chance to assert himself again at the highest level. Botvinnik's talents had been recognized back in 1931, when he won the Soviet championship. The earliest film of him shows him beating fellow Russian Kumok in 1933, and he was widely regarded as the natural successor to world champion Alekhine. But he had to wait until 1948 to compete for the title in a unique 5-way challenge. He became world champion by beating Dutchman Max Erber. But what an amazing sequence was to follow. Smyslov beat Botvinnik. Botvinnik beat Smyslov. Tal beat Botvinnik. Botvinnik beat Tal. Petrosyan beat Botvinnik. For Botvinnik, the unbelievable had happened. He has the unique distinction of losing the title on 3 occasions. He never recovered from the defeat against Petrosyan, and in 1970 he retired from professional play. But he is remembered as a character as well as the first Soviet citizen to hold the world championship. He detested the smell of tobacco and felt that he was distracted by the pipes and cigarettes of his opponents, including Tal. He arranged private training sessions when his trainer, Rogozin, smoked constantly and blew smoke into his eyes. He also contributed to the Soviet phenomenon. His training methods and research findings became the accepted norm in his homeland. His chess school has trained some of the greatest players in the Soviet Union in recent years, including current champion Garry Kasparov. So 2 really powerful personalities faced each other in 1938. Donald, a lot of players will be interested in replaying and studying this classic game, don't you think?
Yes, I notice it's the familiar, the increasingly familiar opening, d4.
That's right.
I think that's the 5th one we've had, isn't it?
That's right. Botvinnik White played d4, and Capablanca played knight f6. And now, as you remember, our last program featured Aaron Nimzowitsch, the inventor of the Nimzo-Indian defense. And we didn't see a Nimzo-Indian in that game. We saw a Queen's Indian, which is a kind of sub-branch of it. But in this game, we see a full-blown...
The full works.
That's right. A full-blown Nimzo-Indian defense. And that's characterized by this development of the bishop to b4. And although Capablanca, playing black here, was a classical player, perhaps closer to Tarrasch than Nimzowitsch himself, Nimzowicz's theories had become so recognized, so accepted by 1938, that it was no surprise at all to see Capablanca playing this defense of Nimzowicz's, where the pawn centre is occupied by white, and black plays in the first instance to control the centre with pieces. And there are many moves here for white. You can play a3, attack the bishop at once. Grandmaster Rudolf Spielmann made a habit of playing this move. Kasparov nowadays plays this, queen to c2, aiming to take back on c3 with the queen, should there be a trade there. Boris Spassky has played bishop g5. And...
Is that really just to avoid doubling the pawns, or is there...
Oh, the bishop g5 or queen?
No, when if you take back with the queen.
Yes, if you play the move queen c2, which is Kasparov's favourite, it's to avoid the doubling of the pawns. People, by and large, don't like to double their pawns nowadays in chess. But and even the young Russians have been experimenting with this move, which is really trying to create a megalomaniac pawn centre by playing this soon afterwards. So there are so many moves in this position. As we said in an earlier programme, chess is You know, it's legion possibilities. There's no true path sometimes in the openings. It's a matter of choice, mood. And Botvinnik played this. And what we're going to see in this game is the birth of the so-called Botvinnik system against the Nimzo-Indian, one of the great classic setups against this very popular opening. And now Capablanca, perhaps showing his adherence to Teresh rather than Nimzovich, took the centre at once with a pawn. In fact, if you want to play in the true Nimzovich style here, the right way is to play b6, fianchetto, and bring out the bishop to b7, still aiming to control the centre with the pieces rather than the pawns. But Kappa played this, d5. And now Botvinnik fearlessly attacked the bishop. And Kappa took off, bishop takes c3, check, and Botvinnik took back, b takes c3. And although, Donald, you can see that the white pawns are doubled, this isn't such a disaster, because white can always play c4 takes d5 in the centre and release the double pawns. It's not a position where the pawns are fixed as a
It can also be a strength sometimes.
They can, yes. Sometimes the double pawns act as a kind of bulwark in the centre, and they can reinforce your central position.
But it's the sort of thing the average club player shrinks from on principle.
Mm-hmm. And now Kappa also struck back in the centre, taking some central
talking
terrain.
of the average club player, you know, your story of the tobacco smoke.
Yeah.
There's a notorious club player in my club, Surbiton,
Yeah.
who smoked out opponents up and down the whole Thames Valley Chess League.
Mm-hmm.
So it still goes on today, these clouds of tobacco smoke.
And what does he use, a pipe or a cigar?
A pipe, a particularly obnoxious pipe.
Well, it's interesting, actually, that in former times in international tournaments and championship matches, it was quite common to see the champion smoking. But nowadays, most of the grandmasters are extremely health conscious. They don't smoke at all.
Yeah.
And in international competitions, smoking's actually been banned. You can't do it. If you want to smoke.
Drinking?
Drinking during the game is...
In moderation.
is
to fortify the nerves.
To fortify the nerves, like stuff it's in sugar, and it's not done. Nowadays, the top players are really... They're sportsmen.
Stick to the Thames water.
They do, yes. They are sportsmen, and they look after their health very, very carefully indeed. They guard it jealously. I don't think any of the top players, Kasparov, Karpov or Fischer, or Jan Timman, any of these people, smoke. Anyway, back in the game, Botvinnik took off in the centre, and Capablanca recaptured. And now an extremely important move. White played this. And he's seizing with his bishop a really key diagonal, b1 to h7. Now, for example, let's put the bishop back on f1 for a minute. You might just play this innocently, thinking it's a good developing move, but in that case, Black would put his bishop here. And suddenly the white bishop on f1 has no really good square. And this diagonal is really critical. Controlling this diagonal makes a big difference to the future development of the attack or counterattack. So, putting the pieces back. This move, really very important. And it's the start of a long-range plan, a very long-range plan, to advance in the centre by playing f3 and e4. And you'll see that white has a majority of pawns in the middle. Black's got a majority on the queen's flank, the left flank, but in the middle, white's got a majority. And if he can set this majority in motion, it can gradually encroach, advance, and start to destroy the black king side. So that's white's long-range plan. Of course, it is very long-range. It can't.
Ray, you're going to have to run that by me one more time.
Sure.
Is there a deeper long-term strategy behind that, or is it simply to get the pawns in the middle?
The idea is you start off with this move after due preparation, then eventually you get this in, and then the idea is eventually to push them all forwards like this, a huge army of pawns coming up like that, which attacks the black king side. But of course, it takes a long time to do it. But the key move in this is to put the bishop on d3 first to gain that diagonal. And Capablanca castled. It's a good move. And now, another very good move by white. Again, you might think that putting the knight here was very sensible. But in fact, Botvinnik developed the knight here. And now we see one of the key points of his system. He keeps the f3 square free for the pawn to be pushed later on. And what he's doing is he's building up pieces. For example, the knight will come to g3 soon.
Is that to kick the black knight if it should?
Yes, partly. Yes, if the black knight were to come into here, of course you have this option of chasing it away. But what white's trying to do is to put the knight perhaps on this square, g3, and help by concentrating pieces on the e4 square to push through this advance that he so desperately needs. So knight e2 is a really excellent move by white. It's one of the keys to the system. Now, Capablanca's no novice. You know, he now comes up with a very good plan. He's been thwarted in his intention of putting the bishop on f5, and now he's going to bring the bishop out to the a6 square to challenge that dangerous white bishop on d3. So this is a good strategic idea by Capa. And Botvinnik castled. And Capa brings out his bishop. It's an excellent move. And of course, white can't avoid the challenge. If he moves the bishop away, saying it's a b1, the black bishop on a6 with its raking fire, pinning the white knight, is just much too dangerous. You can't do that. This would give black an excellent position immediately. So let's put the bishop back. And Botvinnik acquiesced in the inevitable. He took off. And of course, the black knight recaptured. And now white's had some of the fire taken out of his idea of playing for f3 and e4, because the white square bishop has gone. But still, the black knight on a6, in order to affect the exchange of bishops, is now a little bit out of play. It's somewhat on the edge. So white's still got the time to force through this central strategy. And he kicked off with this move, bishop to b2. This is a funny move. I don't think that a modern grandmaster would do this, because the bishop is still completely hemmed in by pawns. And Botvinnik foresees a time when the bishop will be liberated. But perhaps it would be better, objectively, to leave the bishop here and get on immediately with this plan of advancing in the middle. But Botvinnik played this. He's got confidence that one day this bishop will open up. And Capablanca put the queen on d7. And
why does he put the queen on d7?
Yes, it's a good question. Well, he wants to connect his rooks.
I see. Yes.
And d7 is a good flexible square. And there's an old adage in chess that says that once your rooks are connected, once the two rooks are in touch with each other, you can regard your development as having been completed. And it's a good rule to follow, actually, and of many cases where it doesn't work. But if you broadly aim to get your rooks connected by about move 10, then you're doing well. And you can have beginning players, young enthusiasts, can avoid a lot of disasters by getting their rooks connected early on. Botvinnik played this, and he's already thinking of perhaps of creating an extra square with his bishop on a3. And also, the a4 pawn is very clever. He's using this as a bait. We'll see soon how he's using this as a bait, this weak pawn on a4, to deflect the black pieces away from defending on the king side. And Capa played this. I don't like that move. What he's trying to do is to pile up pressure on the e4 square to stop white from playing e4 in the future. Ultimately, it's very hard to stop white from doing that. It's very difficult. And in fact, it's better to put the rook on this square and keep the e8 square as a possible retreat for the black knight.
Yes, especially with the bishop on that diagonal.
So this is Capa's first mistake in the game, really. White played this, attacking the knight. The knight could move. It could go here, for example. But then I think Botvinnik's idea was to play this move. And his bishop on b2 has been liberated. The central exchanges, the pawn clearance, will let the bishop come into the game. So Capablanca decided, and it's a bold decision, to hit the white queen. And now the bishop on b2 is really got no future on that diagonal at all. It can come out to the a3 square later on, but on b2 it's locked in. The queen comes back to c2. And we see now that the pawn on a4 is going to become increasingly difficult to defend.
Yes.
And black has a very long-range plan here, which in fact he...
Well, it's got double protection now.
It has, but white can't leave his rook on a1 forever. It means he could never do anything active. And black's plan, which he now implements, is he puts this knight back here. Now...
Yeah, and jumping in between the rooks, which people like me would try and avoid like the plague.
That's right. It's a temporary discombobulation of the rooks. The rooks aren't going to be...
the American general said we're retreating in order to advance in another direction.
That's what he's doing, because the knight is planning to come to here, then here, and then here. Very long range. But this will cut off the defense of white's pawn on a4. That's what Capa's trying to do. So when you say he's retreating to advance in another direction, exactly right.
That's it.
Let's put the knight back where it belongs, on b8. and see what Botvinnik did. He played this, and this is a principal move. What he's saying in effect is, I don't care about the pawn on a4.
Yeah.
I'm going to concentrate my entire army in the middle, and on the king's side. I'm going to give Capablanca, very dangerous thing to do, because Capablanca was a genius of defence who very rarely lost. I'm going to give Capablanca a completely free rein on the queen's wing, and I'm going to go on the king's side. And Capablanca was nothing if not consistent, and out comes the knight. And Botvinnik steps away from the queen's side and starts to concentrate more force on the other side. And here comes the knight on its path towards b3. And at long last, the pawn moved to f3, which I characterise as being really the key move
The crunch move.
in the Botvinnik system. And now you can see that this move is coming.
Yeah.
And the knight sinks its way in to the b3 square. And now even if Botvinnik wanted to save the pawn on a4, he couldn't do it. There's no way of doing it. He can't bring the rook back to a1
Rook, yes.
because it would be taken by the knight. He can't bring the queen round to defend it in time. He can't advance it because of course black could take it with the pawn or the knight. And I'd like to know, I don't know in fact, because I didn't see any notes written to this game by Capablanca. I'd like to know how Capablanca felt about the position at this stage.
At this stage, yes. Actually, something like that was going through my mind. He's going to pick up that pawn.
Mm-hmm.
But Botvinnik is saying, I don't care.
Yes,
Be my guest.
Yes, and when black gets that pawn, he has a crushing advantage on the queen's wing. And it's not immediately apparent on the right-hand side of the board that white's got anything special going at the moment. These pawns are still way back. The pawns on e3 and f3 haven't made much progress yet. My guess is that Capablanca thought he was winning here. He probably thought that he'd outplayed Botvinnik rather handily. Botvinnik pushed in the centre, and Capa, hardly surprisingly, snatched the pawn. And on comes the pawn in the centre, and the knight runs away. And now, as if to emphasise his abandonment of the queen's wing, Botvinnik puts his queen here, which is a kind of remarkable move, because there's nothing happening on the f-file at the moment. And if there were no pawn on the f3 square, then you would say, yes, of course, he's piling up pressure in the f-file for a devastating attack, but the f-file is completely closed. But he's storing up energy, he's bringing his pieces around for what he recognises will be a really serious attack. And Capa played this, partly to keep the knight out of f5 or h5. And now,
And you're telling me that Botvinnik knows this now already.
he knows he's got a very dangerous attack. Whether he knows he's going to win or not, I don't think so. I think that
But he knows he's got something pretty good going.
he's got something good, but I think even until quite a late stage, he was still terrified that Capablanca would slip out of the noose. Because remember, Capablanca is a genius. He never loses. If you look at the results of all the best players in the history of chess, Capablanca lost fewer games than any other player ever.
And yet, you know, it's almost like a clue in a murder thing. Something makes me ask, why did Botvinnik say, I don't mind about this development here, I don't mind about that one day. It just gives you the feeling he knows more than an ordinary mortal like me can see.
Very good point. You see, one of Botvinnik's main trumps was his tremendous pre-game analysis. He was really the high priest of analysis and preparation. And he probably had positions like this in his own theory beforehand that he looked at and realised he could probably sacrifice the pawn. Now what Capa does now is sensible. He plays f5, trying to block the attack. And this reminds me of something that happened in the Zukertort-Blackburn game we did at the start of the series. White took off. Black takes back, knight takes f6. f5, really trying to break open the f-file, where all its energy is stored. But Capa's not worried. He takes on e1, sensibly eliminating an attacking piece. And white takes back, rook takes e1. And then, very cool, calm, collected, the rook comes across, challenges the white rook, and also he's connecting with the queen on a4, bringing it back into the defence.
Yes.
Obviously, if white trades rooks and the queen comes back, then the attack doesn't end.
Again, so far so good. Yeah.
Botvinnik plays this, threatening, incidentally, rook takes knight on f6. And it's captured. Pawn takes back. And the king moves up to defend the knight.
Why not that move before, right? The king move.
It's possible. I think it would have amounted to the same thing. And now in comes the queen to attack, queen to f4. And the queen rushes back to defend, queen to e8. Queen comes here. White's a pawn down, remember?
Yes.
But the passed pawn on e6 is very strong. And now the queen goes to e7. And this is the classic, this is the position where we justify this game as being in the 12 best. Botvinnik now produces a combination that shatters the black defence. But it's a combination so hard to foresee that even Capablanca could not have envisaged it. Capablanca in this position probably thought, everything's under control, I've defended everything, the white bishop on b2 has got no squares, it can't go to c1, it can't go to a1, it can't go to a3. The white attacks at a standstill. I will now win by playing a5, b5, b4, a4, and queen of pawn. And now Botvinnik blows him out of the water with this amazing sacrifice. He plays this. This bishop that's been dormant for so long sacrifices itself. Bishop a3. He has to take, otherwise if he moves the queen, the pawn goes on to e7. Queen takes a3. And now the next hammer blow. Check. Knight h5, check. The knight's pinned.
Yes.
He has to take it. G takes h5, but now the king has no protection around it. Queen g5 check.
Apart, yeah.
King f8.
There goes the knight.
Queen takes f6 check. King g8. And now e7.
Not f7.
Not queen f7 check first. He needs the queen on that square to defend against the coming counterattack by black. Now, the amazing thing about this is it's not just a brilliant attack by white. He now has to calculate, after this move, queen c1 check, that black doesn't have perpetual check.
Yes,
a draw.
yes. Yes, because it certainly looks like it could be perpetual.
King f2, queen c2 check, king g3. And Botvinnik must have been terrified that he miscalculated and that these queen checks by black would in fact get him a draw.
Yeah.
King h4. Queen e4 check. It looks as if it could be a draw, but somehow the king escapes. King takes h5. Queen e2 check. Still checking the exposed white king. King h4 back again. Queen e4 check.
The pawn. The pawn.
The
yes.
pawn stands in the way. Queen e1 check. And now finally, king h5. And the king escapes from all those checks. And now suddenly, at the end of this immense combination, which started 11 moves ago,
Yes.
the threat,
awe-inspiring.
the threat is this. There's no defense to that.
It is.
And in this position, Capablanca conceded.
You know, Ray, the more we talk about these, the more I see how at this level, the depth of the sort of pre-knowledge of these guys is literally awe-inspiring.
Yes. I think where Botvinnik scored over Capablanca here was that he had studied the position beforehand. Capablanca was very much a child of nature in this respect. He played on instinct. But Botvinnik played on training, preparation.
You mean he was just recreating something?
Yes, to a certain extent. Obviously, not the exact position,
basic
but
principles. Yes.
Well, Donald, I think that was one of the very best games we've seen.
Fantastic.
Thanks very much. The next major figure in Russian and world chess was to be Boris Spassky. Donald and I will be looking at his rise to fame on one of his most provocative games in our next Duel of the Mind. We'll be back. We hope you will. For now, good night.